Hello, the story I will tell you today took place in Daegu, a city located in the southeast of South Korea. Daegu is situated in a basin area surrounded by mountains. It is the fourth largest city in South Korea and is known as the backbone of the country. In the western part of the city, in the Dansel district, there is a mountain called Wadi, which stands at 299.6 meters. The mountain was named after its shape, which resembles a dragon lying down. On the top of the mountain, there is an observatory where you can enjoy a panoramic view of the entire Daegu city. Since climbing the mountain here is not too difficult, many people visit during holidays to hike. However, a shocking event occurred on this mountain that sent shockwaves throughout South Korea. A group of 5 boys went hiking together and then mysteriously disappeared. The case became one of the 3 most mysterious disappearances in South Korea, known as the Frog Boys case. Now let's turn back time to March 26, 1991, to explore the details of the case. March 26, 1991 was a Tuesday. Although it wasn't the weekend, it was a public holiday because local elections were taking place across South Korea. For the children, the day off from school meant a great deal of excitement. At 8:20 a.m., 6 boys were playing together. They were Kim Dong-sik, 9 years old, Park Chan-in, 10 years old, Kim Jong-young, 11 years old, Jo Ho-jung, 12 years old, Gu Chel-won, 13 years old, and Kim Tae-ong, 9 years old. All of them were students from grades 3 to 6 of Seoul Elementary School, located right at the foot of the Wadi mountain. Their homes were also in nearby villages. At this point, they were playing near Jo Ho-jung's house when a young tenant came out and complained that the children were being too noisy and asked them to move elsewhere. So the group gathered together and discussed where they should go to continue playing. One of them suggested hiking up to the nearby Wadi mountain to collect fire salamander eggs. Fire salamanders are amphibians found in forests and mountains, and they lay around 1,060 eggs at a time. After agreeing on their destination, the group split up to go home and gather supplies while also letting their families know. Of the 6 boys, Kim Tae-ong had to stay home after telling his parents about the plan, but his parents thought the trip was too far, so they didn't allow him to go. Sadly, he had to give up on the hiking trip. The remaining 5 boys each brought a container for the eggs and some wooden sticks and headed towards Wadi mountain, laughing and chatting along the way. The morning passed by quickly, and before long it was noon. When the parents of the children noticed that they hadn't returned home yet, they assumed that they had lost track of time while playing and didn't think much of it. By 6:30 p.m., Kim Jong-hyun's mother, while busy with housework, suddenly felt uneasy. She left her chores and went outside to check, but the street was empty and her son still hadn't come home. It was getting dark. Although the Wadi mountain was not far from their homes, and the children had visited there before, the time had come for them to return. The more Kim Jong-hyun's mother thought about it, the more uneasy she felt. So she decided to leave her house and search at her son's friends' homes. On her way, she saw many people gathered, talking. She approached and found out that the 5 boys had gone up the mountain together earlier and still hadn't returned. Everyone started discussing, and the parents quickly grabbed flashlights and headed up the mountain to search. They called out the names of the children, but there was no response. After searching for a while, they still couldn't find any trace of them. By 7:50 p.m., the parents decided to go down the mountain and report the situation to the police. The police, after learning about the case, didn't immediately begin a search because there was a nationwide election going on, and all officers were deployed to maintain order. Also, the children had been missing for less than 24 hours, so the officer on duty reassured the parents not to worry, thinking the children would return soon. However, the parents were not ready to give up. They continued searching up the mountain, and some kind-hearted neighbors joined them. Ironically, it started to rain that evening, making the search even more difficult. Everyone wore raincoats and shined flashlights all over the Wadi mountain until 3 a.m. Exhausted, they had to stop the search and head home. The next day, more than 300 people, including police officers and military personnel, were mobilized to search the mountain. In the afternoon, a helicopter was also deployed, but there was still no sign of the 5 boys. At the same time, the police began to question residents living near the Adonis mountain. From here, they gathered some information from witnesses. The older brother of Jo Ho-jung, one of the 5 missing boys, told the police that around 9 a.m. that day, while he was riding his bike home near the foot of the mountain, he saw his younger brother along with 4 other boys heading up the mountain. When he asked where his brother was going, the boy happily replied that they were going to look for fire-bellied toad's eggs. After that, the older brother told him to head back home for lunch and then left. A woman reported to the police that around 9:30 a.m. that day, after casting her vote, she saw 5 children holding boxes and sticks, happily walking toward the mountain. She overheard them discussing whether they could get back home in time for lunch. Since she was in a hurry to get home, she didn't pay much attention to them. A male student named Hyun Sung-hun told the police that he and the 5 missing boys were all students of Seoul Elementary School. However, on that day, he didn't see any of his 5 friends. He mentioned that earlier that morning, he and some other classmates also went up the mountain to look for fire-bellied toad's eggs. Around 11:30 a.m., while at the cemetery area on the mountain, Hyun Sung-hun suddenly heard a scream from afar. About 10 seconds later, there was another scream, totaling 2 screams. The screams sounded very frightening and unlike the usual playful shouts. Scared, the boy didn't dare to go find out where the screams came from. His parents thought these might have been cries for help from the children after being attacked. However, the police did not follow up on this clue because another witness reported seeing the 5 children near the entrance of the mountain at around noon that day. The police believed the screams might have come from birds or wild animals on the mountain. Additionally, there were other witnesses. For example, a 42-year-old man said that around 4:30 p.m., he saw the 5 children playing near a pond close to the village. However, it must be noted that all the witness statements were based on personal memories, which could easily be inaccurate, leading to discrepancies that greatly affected the police's judgment. The police suspected that the children might have had a dispute with their families and, upset, left home. They might have gotten lost and couldn't find their way back. However, the parents dismissed this theory, asserting that their families were peaceful and they never scolded or mistreated their children. The children had no reason to suddenly leave home. Among the 5 children, the oldest was 13-year-old Gu Cheol-won, and the youngest was 9-year-old Kim Jong-sich. It was hard to believe that a group of children like this would leave home together. The police then shifted their focus to the possibility that someone the children knew was involved. They suspected that the families of the victims might have had a conflict with someone. However, after an investigation, the police concluded that the families of the 5 children were all upstanding citizens, living peacefully with their neighbors, and had never had any serious disputes. Even if there had been minor disagreements, it wouldn't have escalated to harming innocent children. The police then began to suspect that the children might have been kidnapped. 3 days after the incident, on March 29th, the father and uncle of Kim Jong-suk received a phone call from an unknown man. The man's voice sounded like he was around 30 years old, and he claimed to be the one who had kidnapped the 5 children. He demanded a ransom of 4 million won for their release. Kim Jong-suk's father, Kim Do-han, quickly gathered the money and rushed to the agreed-upon location to wait. He waited for a long time, but no one showed up. Afterward, the man never called again. After the incident, the young man who rented a house near Jo Ho-jung's home felt immense regret. He blamed himself, thinking that if he hadn't told the children to play somewhere else, they might not have gone missing. The police were also criticized by the public for not acting quickly enough, missing the critical time to begin searching. Initially, the news about the missing children only spread within the village and nearby areas. Later, the story made headlines, attracting national attention. The media reported that the 5 children had gone up the mountain to catch frogs, and thus they were referred to as the Frog Boys. However, in reality, they didn't go to catch frogs, but instead went to look for fire-bellied toad's eggs. To make it easier for the public to understand, the name Frog Boys was used and has continued to be used up until now. On April 1st, 6 days after the incident, the parents of the Frog Boys printed 50,000 flyers and distributed them at train stations, bus stops, and other public places in the city of Daegu. They also offered a reward of 2 million won for anyone who could provide useful information about the whereabouts of their children. The case became more serious and eventually reached the South Korean president at the time, Mr. Roh Tae-je, who showed great concern. He ordered the police to put all their efforts into investigating the case. Under the president's special directive, The police and military forces coordinated to search the Guardian Mountain and surrounding areas. Nearly every inch of land there was carefully combed. Near the Guardian Mountain, there is a reservoir where a tragic drowning incident of a child had occurred in the past. As a result, some people suspected that after playing on the mountain, the Frog Boys might have gone to the reservoir. To verify this theory, rescue teams used pumps to drain the water from the reservoir, but found nothing. As the case continued to attract public attention, the phone numbers of the boys' families were leaked. The police installed wiretapping devices on these phone lines, and indeed they received many calls. When they answered the phone, they could hear children's voices followed by the sound of the call being disconnected. After confirming this, the police concluded that most of the calls were prank calls. Of course, it was also possible that the real kidnapper had called, but there was no way to confirm that. In August 1992, the police received a call from a mysterious man who claimed that the Frog Boys were buried in the basement of a building in Gyeongbuk. However, when the police pressed for more details, the man immediately hung up. The building he described was the only high-rise with a basement near the boys' homes. The police didn't overlook this lead and immediately went to the building to investigate, but found nothing and concluded it was another malicious prank. During the search, reporters accompanying the police had arguments with local residents. The investigation dragged on for months without results, causing the parents of the boys to fall into despair. Despite being continuously distracted by false information, the police did not give up hope, believing that there was still a chance the boys were alive, possibly kidnapped or sold elsewhere. The reward for information leading to the boys' discovery was raised to 42 million won. The parents of the 5 boys quit their jobs and together bought a truck, driving around the city of Daegu and even across the country distributing flyers in search of their children. Some businesses voluntarily joined in to help, printing the boys' pictures on phone cards, cigarette packages, food wrappers, and even producing advertisements for missing persons on TV. They even printed the boys' images on a giant hot air balloon. By November of that year, the police had received nearly 1,000 calls, but most of them were false information. In November 1992, a year and a half after the incident, the movie Comeback Frog Boys, translated Return Frog Boys, inspired by the case, was released. The case once again shocked the entire country and became a hot topic, with people discussing it everywhere. Because the case had been at a standstill for such a long time, many rumors started to spread. Some claimed the boys had been kidnapped by North Korean spies, while others said they had been abducted by people suffering from Hansen's disease for medical purposes. Although these rumors seemed absurd, the police investigated them, but found no leads and even had conflicts with patients during the investigation. Moreover, even more outlandish rumors spread, such as the claim that the boys were not human and that their sudden disappearance was due to an alien abduction. Throughout the prolonged search operation, about 320,000 people from all walks of life, including the military, participated. In 1995, 4 years after the incident, the police used computers to create a sketch of what the Frog Boys might look like as adults and printed them on flyers. Over 2 million flyers were distributed, but the results were still mostly false reports. In desperation, the police even turned to shamans for help in locating the boys. As time passed, the case gradually faded into obscurity. The parents of the girls, due to the pressures of life, had to return to their work to make a living. In January 1996, Professor Kim Gyong-won, a criminal psychologist from the Korea Institute of Science and Technology, suddenly announced that the Frog Boys had been killed by Kim Jong-suk's father, Kim Cheong-gil, and that their bodies were buried in his house. Kim Cheong-gil was furious at this unexpected accusation. He insisted that he could never commit such a cruel act toward his own children. The Korea Institute of Science and Technology is a top national research university, ranked among the top 5 universities in South Korea. So the police trusted Professor Kim's claims. Despite his deep sorrow and anger, Mr. Kim had no choice but to allow the police to dig up his house to prove his innocence. In January 1996, following Professor Kim's directions, the police began digging and tearing apart Kim Cheong-gil's house. A large crowd of curious onlookers gathered to see whether this man was truly a murderer. The police searched every part of the house, from the bathroom and storage rooms to the yard. Reporters were also present to document the event. After an hour and 40 minutes of searching, Kim Chong-gil's house was left in ruins, but nothing was found. Looking at the empty house, the crowd fell silent. Mr. Kim could no longer hold back his emotions and shouted in frustration, "Losing my children has caused me so much pain, and now someone accuses me of burying their bodies in my house. It's completely unreasonable." After this incident, Professor Kim was heavily criticized by the public. His unfounded theory caused immense damage to Kim Chong-gil's family. Professor Kim was later dismissed from the institute and prosecuted for defamation. However, he continued to defend his stance and even published a book titled "The Truth They Didn't Go to the Mountain." Although Mr. Kim was exonerated, this event caused him significant emotional distress. He sank into alcoholism and passed away from liver cancer in October 2001. Before this, he was a healthy man who had even practiced judo in his youth. Yet the pain of losing his children, coupled with his alcoholism, ruined his health, and he never had the chance to reunite with his beloved son before passing away. In September 2002, 11 and a half years after the incident, there was finally some progress. On September 26th, the Daegu police received a report from a 60-year-old man who was hiking to collect chestnuts. While hiking, he used a stick to move dirt, rocks, and leaves along the path. Upon reaching the middle of the mountain, he discovered what appeared to be clothes buried in the ground. Curious, he dug around and was shocked to find a human skull. The day before, the police had also received a similar report. The caller claimed to have seen human remains on Mount Adolf. However, since they had already thoroughly searched the area and had received many prank calls over the years, the police had ignored the report, assuming it was just another malicious joke. But after the second call, the police began to take it seriously. They immediately sent people to the location provided by the caller. At a shallow dirt pond, they discovered 4 sets of remains stacked on top of each other, with a large rock on top of the bones. About 150 meters away, the police found the 5th set of remains. All of the remains belonged to teenage children. Some of the skulls had large and small holes, and the clothes found in the dirt were not normally worn, but rather had been torn off the bones and tied together. Although the bodies had completely decomposed after examination, the families of the 5 girls confirmed that these were the clothes the girls had worn on the day they went missing. After more than 15 years, the parents still hoped their children were alive, just living somewhere else. But upon hearing the tragic news, they were left devastated. The police hypothesized that on that fateful day, the 5 girls had been playing on the mountain until it got late and they lost their way. To avoid getting separated, they had taken off their jackets and tied them together to hold hands. As night fell and the temperature dropped, they huddled together to keep warm. They might have accidentally tripped over a sharp rock, which caused them to lose consciousness. However, this hypothesis was completely rejected by the victims' families. The reason is that their homes were located just at the foot of the mountain, and they were not newcomers to the area. They frequently went up the mountain to play and were very familiar with the trails. Moreover, the mountain was not high, and even at night, the lights from the houses at the foot of the mountain were clearly visible. The place where the bodies were found was only about 3 kilometers from their homes and about 500 meters from the nearest village, so it was impossible for them to have gotten lost. Near the scene, the police found more than 10 spent bullet casings of various types. In fact, there was a shooting range for the 50th Infantry Brigade of the 2nd Division near the mountain. Therefore, the police suspected that the children might have been killed by live ammunition. However, this theory was quickly dismissed, as it would be extremely unlikely for 5 people to be shot at the same time. Also, even if someone had used a firearm without permission, the gunfire would not have gone unnoticed. After further investigation, the police found that the bullet dents on the victims' skulls did not match bullet wounds, and it was likely that the bullets found were just items the children had picked up on the way. The police's excavation process was covered by the media, which led to harsh criticism from the public. They believed the police acted too hastily, didn't properly secure the scene, and handled the remains unprofessionally. The use of pickaxes for digging and then carelessly placing the remains into bags further upset people. At the scene, the police only checked 1 set of remains and quickly concluded that the cause of death was due to getting lost in hypothermia. The forensic team from Kyungpook National University conducted autopsies, and the results showed that there was no damage to the bones of Park Chan-in and Jo Ho-jong, making it impossible to determine the cause of death. However, the other three girls, Go Chae-won, Kim Dong-suk, and Kim Jong-gil, had multiple injuries on their skulls, including fractures and puncture wounds. Kim Rong-sik had a broken left arm. Among the 5 victims, Gu Cheo-won, the oldest at 13, had the most injuries, with a total of 25 wounds on her body. The exact time of death could not be determined, but it was likely on the day they went missing. The forensic team concluded that the 5 children had been murdered. After several attempts, they eventually found a type of weapon that could cause the similar skull injuries found on the victims. It was a tool with a sharp end and a flat end, used for scraping welds. This tool was not commonly used but was essential for welders. However, it was very difficult to find the culprit with just this clue. Based on the clues gathered, the police reconstructed the crime as follows. The 5 girls went up the mountain to play and then scattered throughout the forest to search for chestnuts. During this time, they were suddenly attacked by a stranger. Gu Cheo-won, the oldest, fought back and was the most seriously injured. Kim Rong-sik tried to run, but was chased and struck on the head with a weapon after being caught. Kim Jong-gil also tried to escape, and during the struggle, her sleeve and buttons were torn, but she was eventually struck on the head and collapsed. After the 3 girls died, the killer controlled Park Chan-in and Jo Ho-jong to prevent them from escaping. He removed their clothes, tied them together to form a rope, and strangled them to death. There were no traces left on the bones of the 2 boys. After all 5 children were dead, the killer buried their bodies in a pit and placed a large stone on top, possibly to prevent the bodies from being found or to mark the location. After committing the crime, the killer may have returned to the mountain or may have been a local resident. His actions seem both planned and impulsive. The weapon used was uncommon, possibly a hammer used on construction sites or in factories, which people would not usually carry around. This suggested that the killer had prepared beforehand. However, the impulsive nature of the crime was evident because the 5 children may have been random victims. They decided to go up the mountain to play that day without any prior planning. Furthermore, carrying out the murders of 5 people at the same time was a very difficult and dangerous task, unlike deliberately targeting these 5 children. These analyses by experts quickly made headlines, sparking many differing opinions. Some people raised questions, such as why there was no hair found at the scene and why many teeth were missing from the victims, as these items would not easily decompose. Therefore, some people suspect that the place where the bodies were found is not the original crime scene. Additionally, the way the clothes were tied at the scene was an unusual knot not commonly used in everyday life. Many also questioned why the police, when thoroughly searching the area at the time, did not find the bodies. The police have not given an official explanation for this issue. It could be because the bodies were buried too deep, and it wasn't until 15 days later, after rain and landslides, that the remains were gradually uncovered. Or it's possible that the bodies were not originally buried on the mountain, but were brought there after the police and military completed their search, creating a perfect time gap. At that time, Mount Dion was a rather desolate area, and it's possible the boys had encountered a mentally unstable person with a criminal history, or even a serial killer with antisocial tendencies. Others believe that the crime occurred around the time of a local council election, and someone might have committed the crime for political reasons, disrupting the mountain area, with the 5 unfortunate children becoming victims. Near the scene, the police also discovered an artificial cave with a narrow entrance that could only fit 1 person. Inside the cave, there were clear signs of habitation and some objects. Based on the packaging, these items dated back to around 2000, which was quite some time before the incident in 1991. Therefore, it's possible that after the incident occurred, someone moved into the cave. In March 2006, 15 years after the incident, the statute of limitations for criminal responsibility in South Korea had passed. This meant that even if the perpetrator confessed, they could no longer be prosecuted. Since that year, another rumor began circulating in South Korea, claiming that the killer was a family living on Mount Guardium. This family had a son with intellectual disabilities and owned a hunting dog. The dog was usually kept in its kennel, but on the day of the incident, The family let the dog out while they were cleaning the kennel. The son didn't watch the dog carefully and it attacked the 5 children playing on the mountain. Fearing discovery, the family killed all 5 children to cover up the incident, then moved away and kept the secret for many years. However, due to guilty conscience, they eventually revealed the truth to others. This rumor spread quickly among the people, and many believed it to be true. However, it was all just a rumor, and no evidence was found by the authorities. In February 2011, another film was released based on the case of the 5 boys, titled The Killing. This once again drew public attention to the case. In 2015, the police officially closed the investigation. As time passed, the debates surrounding the case slowly died down. In 2021, a social media comment brought up the case again, with the author suspecting that the killer was a teacher from the school the girls attended. The teacher, familiar with the area, could have easily controlled the students, as during that time, it was normal for teachers to use corporal punishment. However, after further investigation by journalists, this theory was dismissed as baseless. A year later, another social media post suggested that the weapon used in the crime was a metal ruler, and the perpetrator was a student from a nearby middle school. This type of ruler, which could cause significant damage, had been used in other school fights in the area. Some students were known to gather on the mountain to smoke and drink, leading the author to believe that a group of troubled students might have attacked the girls. However, this theory also sparked controversy. Some argued that although the injuries on the skulls resembled those caused by a ruler, for such wounds to occur, the ruler would need to be more than 30 centimeters long, which would be cumbersome to carry and easy to notice. Therefore, this theory was considered unlikely. The disappearance of the 5 boys became a haunting memory for the people of South Korea. The case exposed flaws in security measures and raised alarms about child protection. Many parents lived in fear, worrying that their children might also face similar dangers. This case, along with 2 other high-profile criminal cases, including the serial killings of taxi drivers and the kidnapping and murder of Lee Hyung-ho, has been a source of national shock. While the serial killings of taxi drivers were solved after 33 years, the case of the missing boys remains unsolved. With advancements in science and technology, many still believe that the truth will eventually come to light. This video ends here, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Goodbye.